Elara felt the chill of the stone floor through the thin soles of her shoes. It was a permanent cold, one that seeped into the bones and settled there, a constant reminder of her station. For 3 years she had been a housemaid at Thorn Crest, the country estate of the Earl of Thorn, and for 3 years the cold had been her most constant companion. Her life was a quiet rhythm of polished silver, starched linen, and the silent, invisible art of being present, but unseen. Tonight, however, the rhythm was broken. A frantic energy thrummed through the house, a current that caught up even the most stoic of the staff. The Duke of Blackwood was coming to dinner. More than that, he was coming to celebrate his engagement to the Earl's daughter, the beautiful and imperious Lady Seraphina. Elara had been tasked with serving the head table, a position of honor that felt more like a punishment. It required a level of invisibility she was not sure she could achieve under such scrutiny. She stood before a gilded mirror in the servants' corridor, adjusting the stark black and white of her uniform. The woman who looked back at her was a stranger. Her face was pale, her hands chapped from lye soap and harsh water. The girl she had once been, the one who read poetry and knew the names of wildflowers, was gone. She had been erased by grief and necessity, her hope long since dried up, leaving a residue as fine and bitter as dust on a forgotten book. Her father's death had taken everything, their small cottage, their respectability, their future. It had left her with nothing but a name she no longer used and a past she had learned to bury. Mrs. Gable, the housekeeper, inspected her with a critical eye, her lips a thin, unforgiving line. "Your hands, Elara, they must be steady. The Duke is a man of immense importance. There will be no mistakes tonight." "Yes, Mrs. Gable," she murmured, her voice a practiced whisper. She clasped her hands behind her back to hide their slight tremble. It was not the Duke she feared, but the sheer weight of the occasion, the suffocating opulence of a world she could now only serve. As the guests began to arrive, their laughter and the rustle of silk echoing from the grand hall, Elara took her position by the dining-room doors. She was a statue, a shadow. Her purpose was to be functional, not human. She watched them pass, the gentlemen in their dark tailcoats, the ladies in jewels that glittered like captive stars. They were beautiful, untouchable creatures from another reality. Then he arrived. The Duke of Blackwood, Alastair Beaumont. The name was announced by the butler, and a hush fell over the assembled company. He was not what she had expected. The whispers among the staff had painted him as a formidable, almost mythical figure, impossibly wealthy, ruthlessly intelligent, and cold as the winter sea. He was tall and moved with a quiet, deliberate grace that commanded attention without demanding it. His hair was dark, his features severe, as if carved from granite. But it was his hands she noticed first. As he greeted the Earl, his fingers brushed against his coat, and she saw the faint dark stains along the edges of his nails and the side of his index finger. Ink. It was an odd detail for a duke, a sign of a scholar, not a peer of the realm. A strange, unsettling feeling prickled at the base of her neck, a flicker of something, a ghost of a memory so faint she could not grasp it. She dismissed it instantly. It was the pressure of the evening, nothing more. A man like that had no place in her world, past or present. He belonged to the jewels and the laughter and the light. He was followed by Lady Seraphina, who clung to his arm as if it were a trophy. She was breathtakingly lovely, her gown a cascade of pale blue satin, her diamonds flashing with every turn of her head. Her smile, however, did not reach her eyes. Her eyes were sharp, assessing, and dismissive of everything that did not directly serve her. The dinner began. Elara moved with the other servants, a synchronized dance of serving platters and wine bottles. Her focus was absolute, her movements precise. She filled water goblets, offered bread, and cleared plates, her gaze fixed on her tasks. Do not look up. Do not meet anyone's eye. Be invisible. Yet she could feel his presence. It was a quiet weight at the head of the table. While Serafina and her father dominated the conversation, the Duke remained largely silent. He was watchful, his expression unreadable. It was time to pour the wine. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she approached him, the heavy silver bottle cold in her hand. She moved to his left side, her body angled away, a gesture of deference. She focused on the crystal glass, on the steady stream of deep red liquid she poured into it. Her hand was rock steady. She did not know she had once worn a simple gold band he had placed on her finger in a dusty, sunlit chapel. She did not recognize the man whose glass she filled, for he was a boy then, and she a girl with a future full of white roses. As she drew back, his hand shifted on the table, and her eyes were drawn again to the ink stains. The flicker returned, stronger this time, a memory of a young man with earnest eyes and ink-stained fingers hunched over a book of poetry, reading to her in a low voice. It was impossible. A phantom of her lonely mind, conjured by exhaustion. She pushed it down, deep into the place where she kept all the other impossible things. She continued her duties, but a crack had appeared in her composure. She found herself watching him. He ate little, his movements economical and precise. He listened more than he spoke, his gaze occasionally drifting towards the tall windows that looked out onto the dark, manicured gardens. He seemed isolated, a man apart from the celebration in his own honor. A junior footman, a nervous boy named Thomas, was serving the sauce. His hand trembled, and a single small drop of creamy liquid fell onto the pristine white tablecloth, perilously close to Lady Serafina's sleeve. The boy froze, his face draining of color. Lady Serafina's lips curled in disgust. "Imbecile," she hissed, her voice low but carrying. "Look what you've done." Mrs. Gable, stationed by the wall, looked as if she might faint. But before anyone could move, the Duke acted. With a swift, subtle movement, he placed his linen napkin over the spot. "It is nothing," he said, his voice calm and even. He did not look at the footman or at Serafina. He simply erased the mistake, a small, quiet act of grace that went unnoticed by all but Elara. It was so at odds with the man she was supposed to be serving. The cold, ruthless Duke would not have bothered. He would have let the boy suffer Serafina's wrath. But this man, the one with ink on his fingers, had. The conversation at the table flowed around him, a river of gossip and politics. He was a rock in its center, still and silent. But Elara began to notice something else. He was deliberately not looking at her. When she approached the table, his gaze would shift to his plate, to his glass, to the face of the person speaking. It was not the casual ignorance of a master to a servant. It was a conscious, determined avoidance. A knot of unease tightened in her stomach. Why? What had she done to earn such specific disregard? Lady Serafina, meanwhile, seemed to take pleasure in her role as the future Duchess. She held court, her laughter sharp and frequent. She spoke of the renovations she planned for Blackwood Manor, of the staff she would dismiss, of the society she would conquer. At one point, her gaze swept over the servants lining the wall, a general surveying an army she found wanting. Her eyes landed on Elara. They narrowed slightly. Elara felt the look like a physical touch, cold and sharp. She kept her own eyes downcast, focusing on a point on the polished floor. "The service in the country is always so lamentably slow," Serafina commented to the table at large, though her focus was clearly on Elara. One would think a simple dinner was a task beyond their comprehension. Elara's cheeks burned. The insult was public, designed to humiliate not just her, but the entire staff of her father's house. She stiffened, her training warring with a sudden fierce surge of pride. She did not move. She did not react. She simply stood, a vessel of quiet dignity, refusing to give the woman the satisfaction of a response. Out of the corner of her eye, She saw the Duke's jaw tighten. A muscle flickered in his cheek. He placed his fork down with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot in the suddenly tense silence. He still did not look at Alara, but the protective stillness around him had changed. It was no longer passive. It was coiled. The rest of the meal passed in a blur of tension. Alara moved as if through water, every step requiring immense effort. She felt as if she were on a stage, a single, harsh light fixed upon her. She could feel Serafina's eyes following her, waiting for another mistake. She could feel the Duke's deliberate avoidance, a void that was more powerful than any gaze. It was during the dessert course. Alara was refilling the water goblets, moving with practiced silence. As she reached for the Duke's glass, the lace cuff of her uniform, starched to a crisp perfection, brushed against a silver dessert spoon. The spoon did not fall. It barely even shifted. It was a whisper of a touch, a contact so slight that no one should have noticed. But Serafina noticed. Her eyes, sharp as a hawk's, had been waiting. Lady Serafina's voice cut through the murmur of the room like a shard of ice dropped into warm water. "That is quite enough." She placed her napkin on the table with a theatrical sigh of exasperation. "This is intolerable. I have never witnessed such clumsiness. Father, have this creature removed at once. She is utterly ruining my evening." The words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. All conversation ceased. Every eye in the room turned to Alara. She stood frozen, the heavy water pitcher in her hand suddenly weighing 1,000 pounds. Humiliation washed over her, hot and suffocating. To be called a creature, to be dismissed like a stray dog. The cold from the floor seemed to rise up and consume her entirely. She could feel Mrs. Gable's horror from across the room, the Earl's embarrassment, the guests' morbid curiosity. She expected the Earl to nod, to have her sent away in disgrace. She expected to spend the rest of the night weeping in the scullery. She did not expect the Duke of Blackwood to move. He stood up. The movement was not sudden or angry, but it commanded the absolute attention of everyone present. He was a tall man, and his shadow fell over the table, silencing everything. He first addressed the Earl of Thorne, his voice deceptively mild. "My lord, I believe there has been a profound misunderstanding." Then he turned, and for the first time that night he looked directly at Alara. His eyes were not grey, as the gossips claimed, but a deep, startling blue, the colour of a twilight sky. And, in their depths, she saw it. Not the cold, unreadable Duke, but something else, a flicker of pain, of regret, of a history she had forced herself to forget. The dam in her memory did not just crack, it shattered. The ink-stained fingers, the quiet, observant stillness, the way his hair fell across his brow. It was him. Older, harder, the softness of youth carved away by time and title, but it was him. Alistair. The boy she had married in a secret, desperate ceremony 8 years ago. The boy who had vanished from her life a week later, leaving only silence and a broken heart she had learned to live with. Her breath caught in her throat. The water pitcher slipped from her numb fingers, crashing onto the thick carpet with a dull, muffled thud. Water bloomed across the pattern like a dark flower. Lady Serafina scoffed. "A misunderstanding? Alistair, the girl is a clumsy oaf. She should be grateful I don't demand she be whipped." Alistair did not even glance at his fiancée. His eyes remained locked on Alara's, a silent communication passing between them that spanned 8 years of silence. "You misunderstand, Lady Serafina," he said, his voice now laced with an edge of cold steel. "You misunderstand your position. You cannot dismiss this woman." "And why, precisely, can I not?" she demanded, her voice rising. He held Alara's gaze, and the world seemed to shrink until it contained only the two of them, standing on opposite sides of a chasm of time. "Because," he said, and his voice was clear and resonant, filling every corner of the silent, shocked room. "She is my wife." The silence that followed his words was not empty. It was a physical weight, pressing down on her like the deep, cold water of a well. It was a silence so profound that Ilara could hear the frantic, terrified drumming of her own heart. Wife. He had said the word. A word she had not allowed herself to think for 8 years. A word that had once meant hope, and now meant only an old, deep ache. Lady Seraphina was the first to break the spell. She let out a laugh, a brittle, ugly sound that shattered the quiet. "Alistair, have you lost your mind?" A joke in the poorest possible taste. "Apologize to my father at once." But Alistair did not look at Seraphina. He did not look at the Earl, whose face was a mask of thunderous disbelief. He only looked at Ilara, his blue eyes pleading, searching, desperate. "It is no joke," he stated, his voice unwavering. "We were married 8 years ago, in the village of Oakhaven. Her name is Ilara Beaumont. She is the Duchess of Blackwood." Duchess. The title was so absurd, so alien, that Ilara felt a hysterical laugh bubble up in her own throat. Her, a duchess, a woman who scrubbed floors and slept in a cold attic room. The world had tilted on its axis, and she was sliding off. "Proof!" the Earl of Thorn boomed, his face purple with rage. "You make this outrageous claim in my house, at your own engagement dinner. You will provide proof, or by God, you will answer for it." Now the power shifted. It moved from the furious Earl, from the scornful Seraphina, from the resolute Duke, and it settled, impossibly, on her. On the servant girl with the ruined shoes and the chapped hands. Alistair might have documents and legal papers locked away in some solicitor's office, but in this room, at this moment, she was the only proof that mattered. Alistair turned his vulnerable gaze fully upon her. The Duke was gone, and in his place was the boy from the chapel. "Ilara," he whispered, his voice for her alone, though the entire room strained to hear it. "Tell them." He had given her the stage. He had handed her a power she had never imagined possessing. She could destroy him with a single word. She could shake her head, deny everything, and retreat back into the shadows. It would be easier, safer. The life of a servant was hard, but it was known. The world he was offering was a terrifying, unknown country. But then she looked past him, at Lady Seraphina's face, which was a twisted mask of fury and contempt. She thought of the word creature. She thought of the years of invisibility, of being less than human in the eyes of people like this. And then she looked back at Alistair. She saw the boy who had loved poetry, the boy who had been gentle and kind, and she saw the man who had protected a clumsy footman from scorn. A strength she did not know she possessed rose up in her. It was the strength of the girl who had survived her father's death, who had endured poverty and loneliness and endless, thankless work. She would not be a shadow any longer. She lifted her chin. She drew a breath, and when she spoke, her voice was not the whisper of a servant. It was the clear, steady tone of a woman who knew her own worth. "It is true," she said. A collective gasp went through the room. Seraphina looked as if she had been struck. "A lie!" the Earl snarled. "She is a fortune hunter, a conspirator." Ilara held his gaze, unafraid. Her decisive act was not just to agree, but to prove it in a way no one could refute. She would not speak of the ring he had given her, a simple gold band she had been forced to sell for food years ago. She would not speak of the certificate she had burned, believing it to be a worthless reminder of a foolish dream. She would give them a memory, a piece of the truth that belonged only to her and to him. "The parson who married us," she said, her voice ringing with clarity, "had a nervous cough that worsened when he was agitated. He coughed through the entire ceremony." She paused, then looked directly at Alistair, her heart aching with the memory. And you promised me a garden of my own, with white roses, because they were my mother's favourite. You said you would fill an entire acre with them at Blackwood Manor. The detail was so specific, so intimate, so undeniably true. It hung in the air, irrefutable. It was a truth that could not have been invented. Alistair's eyes shone with unshed tears. He gave a single, sharp nod, his face a canvas of relief and remembered pain. The illusion of the evening was shattered. Lady Seraphina's face crumpled like scorched paper. The Earl of Thorn stared, speechless, his authority utterly dismantled. In that moment, Ilara was no longer a servant. She was no longer invisible. She had claimed her name, her past, and her future with 3 simple sentences. She was the Duchess of Blackwood, and the entire world had just been forced to bow to the fact. Alistair moved around the table in 3 long strides. He did not touch her, not yet. He simply stood before her, creating a barrier between her and the stunned, hostile room. "Come," he said softly. "Let us leave this place." He offered her his arm, the arm of the Duke of Blackwood, the arm of her husband. Her hand, red and chapped, trembled as she placed it on the fine wool of his coat. Together, they turned their backs on the wreckage of the engagement dinner and walked out of the room, leaving a world of shattered expectations in their wake. 3 months later, Ilara stood in the grand library of Blackwood Manor. Sunlight streamed through the towering arched windows, illuminating the motes of dust dancing in the air. The room was filled with the scent of old paper, lemon oil, and beeswax. It was a scent of peace, of permanence. It was her home. The transition had not been easy. There had been solicitors and scandal, whispers in London, and the quiet, unending shock of the staff who had once been her peers. But Alistair had shielded her from the worst of it, his power and his title a bulwark against the storm his revelation had unleashed. He found her there, standing before a shelf of books on horticulture. He had ordered them for her, dozens of them, all bound in rich leather. He came to stand beside her, his presence a familiar comfort now, the initial shock having given way to a quiet, tentative rediscovery. For a long time, they were silent, watching the sunlight move across the spines of the books. "I thought you were dead," he said finally, his voice low. It was a conversation they had had before, but the truth of it was still raw. "After my father sent me away on that tour of the continent, he wrote to me a month later. He said there had been an outbreak of fever in Oakhaven. He said you had succumbed. I believed him for 8 years." Ilara traced the gold lettering on a book titled The Cultivation of the Rose. "And I believed you had abandoned me, that our marriage was a boy's foolish whim, easily forgotten." "Never," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "It was not a whim. My father, he forced the marriage. It was to settle a debt he owed your father, a debt of honor I never knew about until it was too late. He orchestrated the whole thing, then tried to erase it. When he died last year, I became the Duke, but I was hollowed out. I saw no purpose in anything. The engagement to Lady Seraphina was a matter of duty, of securing the line. It meant nothing to me. I was a ghost, just going through the motions of life." He turned to face her, his blue eyes earnest. "The moment I saw you at Thorncrest, I felt as if the world had righted itself. But I did not know what to do. To speak would have created a scandal that would have destroyed you. To remain silent was a torment. I was a coward, Ilara. I waited until I had no other choice." She looked at him then, at the man who was her husband. She saw the weight of his grief, the loneliness that had mirrored her own. They were 2 people broken by the same lie, living separate, empty lives only miles apart. "You are the Duchess of Blackwood," he said, his voice formal yet filled with a deep, unspoken hope. "This house, the fortune, the title, it is all yours, by right. You are free to do with it and with your life as you wish. If you desire to live separately, to have your own establishment, I will arrange it. You owe me nothing, Elara. I am the one who owes you 8 years of a life that was stolen from you." He was giving her a choice, the final, most important choice. He was not assuming she would stay. He was not claiming her as a possession. He was offering her freedom, the very thing she had never had. She looked out the window towards the west lawn. The gardeners had already begun their work, turning over the soil in a vast, empty acre of land. They were preparing the ground for her garden, for her white roses. A small, true smile touched her lips for the first time in years. She had entered Thorncrest as a servant, invisible and voiceless. She had walked out as a duchess, a woman who had reclaimed her own story. The future was uncertain, a path to be built, not followed. The boy she had married was gone, but the man he had become was here, offering her not a command, but a choice. She turned back to him, her heart no longer a frantic, trapped thing, but a steady, quiet beat. "I think," she said softly, "I should like to stay and see if the roses will grow." It was not the end of a story, but the beginning of one. A quiet promise that, even after the longest, coldest winter, it is never too late for a garden to bloom.